Hi, this afternoon we're doing another long video. This time I'll be making a small nougat bowl. So we have white powder on the marver over here, which you need. Two parts of it, but they're the same. And we have coloured chips on the other marver, which we need in a minute. So, first of all, I'm just going to get the blowing iron a little bit warmer. So we get asked a lot in here where our tools come from. So the blowing irons come from Sweden. All the tools they used to come from a guy called Ivan Smith. You tend to make your own glass blowing chairs and your marvers and all the other bits of kit you need. And we try and repurpose things. So here's an old bit and brace. That came out of a skip outside the Brewhouse Theatre. There's some old monkey wrenches, etc. So here we go. Oh, that probably needs to be a little bit hotter than that. So this range was inspired while I was on a beach on a Greek island. I can't remember which one it was, but all I can remember is I was picking up pebbles, which is my wont, and the beach was made of a conglomerate geology, so the pebbles were spotty, not stripy. And I can remember being quite excited by this. And we had young children at the time, myself and my wife. So we got to the beach early in the morning, and I was quite happy wandering along the bit where the water comes in and goes out and all the pebbles are shiny, picking up the pebbles, putting them in my t-shirt, turn round, and a volleyball, and this is an absolutely true story, a volleyball bounced up to my feet, and I looked up and there was a very naked German lady, and unfortunately it was a nudist beach. And I can remember thinking, all I could think about was this design I'd come up with, much to the amusement of the rest of my family, who realised that I hadn't got a clue that the beach was full of nudists and I was the only one with any clothes on, which was a tad embarrassing at the time. So there we go. So, hot iron. This is a small iron. This is a smaller board we normally use for the small nut bowls. So I'm going to put on a small gather of glass. So we have a pot in here, holds about 140 litres of glass. So this is a gather of glass. It's clear. It only looks orange because it's hot. And I'm going to roll it through the white powder. And I want to get an even coating of white powder all over this gather of glass. You can always tell the people who've had a very poor background or a very expensive background, because they always get very excited when they see this much white powder on the marver. It's a good job our local MP doesn't come in here very often, isn't it, really? Well, our ex-local MP. So there you go, that's covered with a white powdered glass. I'm going to heat this up. So I've got to melt in the white powder. This is called a glory hole. We only put this on when we're blowing glass. It uses as much energy as the furnace, well, it uses a lot more energy than the furnace does per hour. So you can see if I stop turning this iron, the glass will drop down. So you're working with a molten material the whole time. So once it's hot enough, I'm going to dab it into the coloured chips over there. And this design is completely random. So you can see we've got a bit of colour back in there. And these chips will stick to the hot glass. So I'm going to put a coating on there. Back in the glory hole to heat them up. Now, some of these chips will jump off because they just the heat shock is too much, and this range kills your glory hole, because when hot glass touches the ceramic blanket, it'll eat through it. So what you tend to do with this range is do a load of them in the same sessions and then reline the glory hole. So although it's completely random, I'm going to come back to the chair and just make sure the chips are on here evenly, because as it goes round you can see there's one bit there at the top that looks as though it could be a little bit bold, like me. Back to the chair. So I'm just going to edge the chips around to make sure that all the spaces are filled up, if I can do. But it is random, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. And now I've got to melt them in. So all the colours have a different coefficient of expansion. So although they'll melt in and they'll overlap each other, they won't melt in and completely mix together. So hopefully when the piece is finished, you get a glorious amalgamation of all these different colours. So it takes a bit of time for these things to heat in. Some of the colours heat in quicker than others. It all depends on the chemical composition of the colours. So all the colours obviously come from oxides, and the blues made of cobalt will tend to be a lot softer than the reds and the yellows, which are made of selenium and things like that, and gold. And if you look at the piece now, you can see that all the colours have gone quite round. So that's as they're melting in. I'm turning the iron in both directions, so I don't want the colours to swirl. So I'm trying to keep them quite straight down the piece. So once they're hot enough, I'm going to hold the piece slightly up so the cold gather doesn't get too long. And I'm just going to iron them in slowly. So this is a metal table called a marver. And I'm just ironing the piece in. So you can see at the moment, I haven't got a smooth surface as it goes round, and there's slight gaps in it. So if I gathered more glass on that, where the gaps are, I get an air bubble. So I've got to heat this in enough until I've got a completely smooth surface. And when I've done that and I've got it back on centre, I will put some air inside it so I've got the start of the piece being blown. I hope all this is making sense. I'm never quite sure, really. But you're more than welcome to email in with your inquiries as long as they're reasonably sensible. Well, they don't have to be reasonably sensible at all. So what I'm going to do is, when I roll at the metal table takes a lot of heat out of the glass. So I've got a pad of wet newspaper down there, and that I can use that to shape the piece, and it won't take so much heat out of it. So I'm back to the chair. This has got to be damp, so I've got a bit of water on it. And I'm just going to roll it in here so it's on centre. And then I'm going to put a bit of air in. So I've blown down the blowing iron. I've got my thumb over the end of the blowing iron. Air expands when it gets hot. So hopefully, if I've done this right, this will just start blowing out a little bit, and you can just see it starting to move there. And I'm going to do it again. And it's quite a small movement at the moment. But you can see it go there now. So you can see it's now changed shape. And I'm going to blow normally now. Now this bit of glass here is still at sort of 800, 900 degrees. So I've got to gather some more glass over this. So this is now going to be cold enough to retain its structure, but not too cold that when I gather over it, this piece won't blow out. And generally, this is sort of just by experience. There's quite a lot of tolerance in it. If you gather on it too hot, you have to work very hard to keep it on centre. If you gather on it too cold, you're going to have more trouble blowing. So I reckon that's about right now. So I'll gather on that now. So I'm doing a very slow gather. I'm trying to drop a lot of the clear glass back off the piece and keep the tail of the gather roughly on centre. Back to the chair. So very often with blowing, I mean this piece is a very good example of it, a lot of the time, a lot of the effort is spent right at the beginning, putting all the decoration on. The actual blowing up of the piece is a relatively quick thing to do. So I've got to centre all the clear glass. You have to give it a little bit of time for that hot glass to remelt the first gather, and then you can blow. And because all the colours are different coefficiencies, I have to spend a lot of time keeping this on centre. You can see it's blowing off centre there. So one of those colours, I can see it's a cream. There's a big lump of cream at the top. So I'm going to let that cool down a little bit before I blow again. This line is the line called a necking in line. And that's where this piece will come off the blowing iron. So if you imagine as you're blowing, so the bubble is roughly halfway down here now. Where the glass is thin, it's cooling down quicker than where the glass is thick. So if I blow now, where the glass is thick will blow out a little bit more than where the glass is thin. So it means you're more likely to get an even wall thickness. I'm going to heat the whole thing up again. But I don't want to get it too hot because then I just have to wait for it all to cool down. So, blow it again. Whole piece back on centre. Blow a bit more. So, I'm sure you've all worked out that's the top of the bowl, that's the bottom. So, I'm now just going to flatten the bottom. So it's just a metal paddle. Now we've got to transfer this piece of glass to another iron called a punty iron. So I just make sure the bottom's flat. Now I've just got a little bit of chalk here that I'm just going to run around the bottom so I know where the middle of it is. So when I put the punch on, I'm more likely to get it right. So put that bit of fire out. So I'm going to hang this up. Get my punch on. Now this is just a solid iron. So I'm going to make a little button punty. I'm just leaving a little bit of hot glass on the end like that. Put this back over the chair. And every glass blower does this differently. This is just my way of doing it. So I've got to get this iron on the same axis as the blowing iron. So it's important I get this in the middle. I use a wet file. People use lots of different things. And then that will come off there. So I've now got a hole at the top. So now if you can see, I don't know whether you can see that, can you see the hole at the top of the piece? So what I'm going to do is the bottom half of the piece, or the bottom third of the piece, is definitely finished. I'm going to heat up the top bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shear off the top edge. And that has two benefits. One benefit is it means that the shape of the bowl is slightly better, and the second is that I get a slightly better finish on the top edge. So I'm just heating up right at the top edge now. I'm going to move this iron rest out the way, just gives me a little bit more room. And again, this is done really by judgment. But what you do is when I come back to the shower, I look and see how hot it is, then I know how quickly I've got to shear it or how quickly I've got to move. So you can see the top edge has now gone bright orange again. I'm just going to put the jacks in there, which gives me a little bit of a line to follow. And I'm going to cut round here. So, there's nothing special about those shears, and now I've got to heat the whole thing up. It's just that if you get glass at the right temperature where it's a little bit pliable, you can cut it. If it's too hot, it's too squidgy to cut. If it's too cold, obviously, you know, you can't cut glass that's too cold. So now I've heated up the whole piece. So I've got to make sure the punty iron stays reasonably warm, else it will get too cold and it will fracture off. Now I think that's a little bit close to the edge, so I'm going to open the door of the glory hole to give myself a little bit more leeway. And that also has the benefit of the heat just creeping around the back of the piece. So you can see how knackered the front door is and the second door in from making Nougats. That's all the glass dropping off and eating through the blanket there. So they are due a replacement. So if you look carefully, you can see the piece is going slightly off centre as it comes out, and you can see because of centripetal force, it's already quite wide. So again, my wet piece of newspaper, and I'm starting from this end of it, from the bottom of it, opening out and just edging it out. So what I'm looking for is the outside shape of the bowl here. I really like the top edge of these bowls to be asymmetrical, and they're asymmetrical depending on the colours. The colours either pull the piece back or expand or contract depending on what colour they are. And of course, I don't really know exactly which colour they're going to be till the end. So you can see now the piece has opened out even more. So I'm looking for the outside form of the bowl. And there you go. That's now finished. Now everything I make all day has to go away in a kiln and cool down slowly. That's still at 700 degrees or so. So I'm just going to knock it off here, pick it up. Well, I'm going to warm up the glass, pick it up and put it in the kiln overnight. And then what we'll do is we'll grind the bottom flat on a grinder, and then that'll be the piece done. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching.